President Donald Trump of the United States has begun what is called a trade war with China. And this past week, which is like the first week in August, the trade war escalated. And so apparently what happened is that Trump put a lot of tariffs on Chinese imports to the United States in order to put pressure on the Chinese, economic pressure, so they would change their policies on how they treat American companies and various other measures, but basically how they treat American companies, access to the Chinese market, not taking American intellectual property, things like that. And Chinese didn't really budge, and there was some negotiations, and then last week there was another round of negotiations in Shanghai, and the Chinese didn't really budge. So I guess the pressure really wasn't working on them. In the meantime, the Chinese are not buying a lot of American soybeans primarily, which is hurting the income of farmers in the Midwest, whose votes will be very important to Mr. Trump in the election coming up next year. And so he has arranged for the federal government, he's promised to transfer $27 billion of federal money, which comes from taxpayers, to the farmers, to keep them whole while the struggle with the Chinese as to who's going to blink first, who's going to cave first, goes on. Trump then apparently, according to a newspaper story, against the advice of his advisors, imposed another tariff on $300 billion worth of Chinese goods, a tariff of 10%, this time including a lot of toys and things like that, which ordinary Americans will buy for Christmas. So this is a trade war which is costing American farmers markets and costing American consumers dollars, because they're paying higher prices for the goods, which have to be taxed in order to have some money end up in the US Treasury. The Chinese then responded by having the central bank intervene less in currency markets. So the value of the Chinese currency, the renminbi, the yuan, it became lower, which means that it's going to take more yuan to buy US goods, which means Chinese consumers will probably buy less from America, thus inflicting economic harm on the United States. The thing I find sort of surprising about this is that I had kind of assumed that most informed and sophisticated people went back to Adam Smith in his book, The Wealth of Nations, with his critique that tariffs and mercantilism and protectionism actually was counterproductive for the country which imposed the tariffs, set up the protectionist barriers. And his classic example was France under the Bourbon kings, as opposed to England. And his argument was that free trade and expanded markets always work out better for everyone. It is difficult to see how this trade war is going to come to a quick conclusion. The Wall Street judgment, the stock market judgment in America, and also other stock markets around the world, it has come to a negative inference that this means trouble for the growth in the global economy. Therefore, they're lowering their expectations of corporate success and profits and growth in the global economy. To me, this is an example, if you will, of moral capitalism, being that if capitalism properly done is what creates the most wealth for the most people, and too much government intervention and regulation to try to specify outcomes always has consequences where somebody has to pay somebody else in some form of rent extraction. One feels a bit helpless looking at the stubbornness of Mr. Trump and the stubbornness of the Chinese. One can only hope that this sort of mutual destruction arrangement will end quickly, as both sides see it really isn't so good for them in the short run or in the long run.